In recent years, Christian apologists have popularized an argument known as the crucifixion dilemma. The core of this argument is simple. If Jesus wasn't crucified, then the disciples were deceived or mistaken, which undermines the Qur'an's claim that they were true believers. But if Jesus was crucified, then the Qur'an is wrong. Either way, they claim, Islam collapses. It's a bold claim, but is it really the death blow they think it is? Let's take a deep dive into this supposed dilemma and see whether it holds up under serious scrutiny. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. Islam holds a unique position on the crucifixion. The Quran in Surah 4157 says, "They did not kill him, nor did they crucify him, but it was made to appear so to them." What does this mean? It means that while Jesus was not actually crucified, something occurred that led people to believe that he was. This was not deception from God in the malicious sense. Rather, it was a protective act, a divine intervention to save a prophet from an unjust execution. Jesus was raised up by God, alive and unharmed. Early Islamic commentators proposed various theories to explain how this happened. The most well-known is the substitution theory, that someone else, possibly a volunteer or someone made to resemble Jesus, was crucified in his place. This view comes from narrations attributed to early companions and commentators, but the Quran itself does not provide specific details. It simply affirms the fact that Jesus was not killed nor crucified. Christian apologists claim that the crucifixion of Jesus is a well-attested historical event. They point to the Gospels, Paul's letters, and a handful of external references as evidence. However, these sources are not as ironclad as they are often portrayed. The Gospels were written decades after Jesus by unknown authors based on oral traditions passed through generations. They are theological narratives shaped by belief, not dispassionate eyewitness accounts. Moreover, each Gospel contains contradictions in the details of the crucifixion. Who was present, what Jesus said, and even what happened afterward. If these were factual historical reports, we'd expect far more consistency. What about external sources? Tacitus, Josephus, and others mention Jesus, but their references are extremely brief and often debated for authenticity and accuracy. They confirm that there was a belief in Jesus' crucifixion, not that it actually happened. It's important to remember, people believing something doesn't make it true. Throughout history, many events were reported as fact by masses of people and later proven false or misunderstood. Islamic theology is not based on majority historical opinion, but on divine revelation. Just as Muslims reject the divinity of Jesus, despite centuries of Christian belief in it, they also reject the crucifixion as it is understood in Christian theology. This is the heart of the crucifixion dilemma. If someone else was crucified, wouldn't the disciples have known? And if they thought Jesus was crucified, doesn't that mean the Quran is wrong in saying they were guided believers? Let's unpack this carefully. The Quran never says the disciples knew everything perfectly or that they were infallible. It says they were sincere believers and helpers of Jesus. That does not require them to have had full knowledge of every divine action or event, especially in a moment of chaos and trauma like the arrest and crucifixion. Moreover, the Quran distinguishes between the disciples of Jesus and those who came later. In fact, Surah 4157 says, "Those who differ concerning it are in doubt." The Quran is pointing the finger not at the original disciples, but at those who came after, who had no certain knowledge and relied on conjecture. It's entirely plausible and consistent with the Islamic narrative that God protected Jesus while allowing events to unfold in a way that fulfilled his greater plan, even if some observers misunderstood what was happening. Another common claim is that Jesus predicted his own crucifixion, and therefore, if he wasn't crucified, he must be a false prophet. This is presented as a catch-22. If Jesus was wrong, he's not a prophet. If he was right, then Islam is false. But this argument assumes that the sayings attributed to Jesus in the Gospels are accurate, unaltered, and reliable. From an Islamic perspective, that assumption is flawed. The Quran clearly states that previous scriptures were altered over time, not necessarily in every word, but enough to distort essential truths. Muslims do not believe the Gospel accounts are 100% the words of Jesus. In fact, many scholars, including secular academics, acknowledge that the Gospels contain many statements that likely originated from early Christian communities rather than Jesus himself. Furthermore, many of the so-called predictions of Jesus' death are vague, symbolic, or based on interpretations that are open to question. Even within the Gospels, there are discrepancies. The Gospel of John, for example, portrays a very different tone and style than the Synoptic Gospels. These differences reveal theological evolution rather than consistent prophetic statements. Critics of Islam often say the substitution theory is morally problematic. Why would God allow an innocent person to be crucified in place of Jesus? But this criticism rings hollow, especially coming from Christian theologians who believe Jesus, completely innocent, died for the sins of others. In Christianity, Jesus is sacrificed for the guilt of others. In the Islamic view, the substitute, if indeed there was one, was either divinely chosen or volunteered and was honored with paradise. That's not injustice. That's divine wisdom and reward. And even here, we must remember, the Qur'an does not specify that a substitute was definitely used. That's an interpretation, not an explicit article of faith. The essential point is that Jesus was not crucified or killed. The exact mechanism is not the focus. Christians argue that the disciples' belief in the resurrection proves that Jesus was crucified and rose from the dead. But again, belief doesn't equal fact. Human beings have experienced mass visions, dreams, and misinterpretations throughout history. Grief, trauma, and expectation can produce powerful psychological effects. The resurrection belief may have grown from a small group of followers trying to make sense of a devastating loss and interpreting a rescue as a resurrection. From the Islamic view, this belief was based on a misunderstanding of what truly happened, a misunderstanding that became embedded in Christian theology over time. The Quran was revealed to correct this mistake and restore the truth about Jesus. He was not crucified, not killed, and not raised from the dead because he never died. God's protection of Jesus is not just about saving one man. It sends a profound message. First, it reaffirms the dignity and protection of God's prophets, that God does not abandon them to the hands of their enemies. Second, it separates true divine justice from man-made narratives. Third, it reveals that salvation does not require human sacrifice, but submission to the one true God. Jesus will return before the end of time, as the Quran and Hadith affirm. His mission is not finished. He will clarify the truth, break the cross, slay the false Messiah, and establish justice, not as a God, but as a servant of God. The real dilemma isn't for Islam, it's for those who uncritically accept the version of events shaped by later theologians, empires, and councils. Islam does not fear history, Islam corrects it. The crucifixion story, as commonly told, is not a problem for Muslims. It's a problem for those who take assumptions and elevate them to dogma. The Quran preserves what was lost, that Jesus, the Messiah, was a true prophet, born of a virgin, performed miracles by God's permission, was not crucified, was raised to heaven, and will return. That's not a contradiction. That's a correction. So the next time someone brings up the crucifixion dilemma, remember this. The only thing it really destroys is the illusion of certainty built on fragile foundations. Thanks for watching. If you found this video enlightening, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and let us know in the comments, what do you think about the crucifixion dilemma? Until next time, peace be upon you.